Hello, welcome to this video, and this video is going to be called Every Prog Fan Should Listen to This Jazz Album. Okay, the album in question is by Brad MEHLDAU. I think that's how you say his name, and it is this album, if I could get the shine off it. It is Jacob's Ladder, came out in 2022, it's a couple of years old. I've been listening to this album for a while. Often when you do reviews, you get an album, it's like you go listen to, give it 3 or 4 listens and then you do the review. But I've been sat with this album for a while now. Now, on this video, I want to review this album. I want to go into the themes and the ideas and musically what is going on this album. But also, I want to use this album to explore jazz, especially the state of modern jazz, and also prog and the state of modern prog, and also try and carve out a bit of territory between the two, which could well be interesting to some of the viewers of this channel, because this channel covers prog and it covers jazz and it covers fusion. All of those styles are on this album and more. This is a really interesting album, and I think it's going to inspire a lot of discussion here, exploring the ideas that are on this album. I found it very, very interesting. So this is going to go way beyond just a review of the album. It's going to go somewhere else as well, or I hope it does. So if you're ready, I will start off with telling you a little bit more about this album, right? So Brad MEHLDAU is a pianist. He's about my age, I think. He's been on the scene for a number of years now, probably about 30 years. If you want to know about Brad, he's recently done an interview with Rick Beato, which is absolutely excellent video interview. It promoted me to go back and dig this album out and have another listen, and then since that interview's come out, I've had it on rotation. And I've started to see deeper into this album, okay? So, I think it was a couple of years ago now, I was covering prog on this channel. Then I did a video which was inspired or motivated by a comment that somebody put on another of my videos, where they said, well, all modern jazz sounds the same. So that became the title of the video, Why does all modern jazz sound the same? Something like that, question mark. I banged that out, they're not expecting that much, and the video did like 100,000 views. I pushed a button. There was a lot of people agreeing with me, but there was also a lot that found me saying this quite offensive, and I got some pushback. And one of the musicians that continually came up was this guy, Brad MEHLDAU. How could you say all modern jazz musicians sound the same? Go and listen to Brad MEHLDAU. Now my answer at the time was, well, Brad's been around for 30 years. This is like a long time in music history, really. Is this really a new musician? But I was very aware that people had pointed out a very creative, interesting musician that is not doing the same thing as Bill Evans or Chick Corea. And he definitely isn't. And so back then, I went and got this album. And sat there going, well, it's pretty amazing. Now, Brad MEHLDAU is... where do we start with this? He, to my ears, listening to him play, in terms of his piano style, there is a strong influence from Keith Jarrett. In a way, this album sounds like an almost postmodern take on some of the albums that Jarrett did in the early 70s with the American Quartet. That's something that struck my ears. In that he explores the blues, he explores gospel, he explores almost like Americana, singer-songwriter areas in a lot of his music. But he also can go to a sort of abstracted jazz improvisation that's rooted in part more in Ornette Coleman. There's a lot of freedom there in the way Jarrett plays and the way Brad plays. And he also will move towards the classical as well. There's a classical influence. Brad MEHLDAU started out as a classical pianist. So when this accusation came against me, I listened to it and said, well, yeah, he's amazing and I love him, but he does sound like Keith Jarrett. But when you go back to Keith Jarrett and compare him to a pianist 50 years before, which is the reality of the situation, we're then going back to the 1920s, like, you know, I don't know, Jelly Roll Morton. And the travel is huge, and that was my point. Compositionally, I hear a very strong influence from Pat Metheny, and Brad has played with Pat Metheny. So that is where, back 2 years ago, I came and approached this album, was thinking, yeah, I could hear the influences. This is often how we approach jazz when we listen to it. What's this guy doing, and how does it relate to what I already know? Okay, but Brad MEHLDAU differs to a Keith Jarrett or Bill Evans in that he grew up in an era where rock music was apparent. And now I've said this on this channel so many times, a big difference with modern jazz musicians, a lot of them have come to jazz through rock music. That was my journey. I was brought up listening to jazz by my dad, but it was all sort of, you know, West Coast jazz. It was Dave Brubeck Modern Jazz Quartet. Then I discovered the new wave of British heavy metal, which then took me on sort of classic rock, Led Zeppelin, which then took me on to progressive rock. And when I got into progressive rock, it was like opening a door to a new world for me. The Yes album, which was the first progressive rock album I ever heard, Starship Trooper, just blew me away. I heard something else in that music, which then took me through to, you know, jazz fusion, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Chick Corea, and then John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Archie Shepp, Albert Ayler. I went down a journey towards jazz through rock music. And Brad MEHLDAU, being a similar age, has done exactly the same thing. And in many cases, exactly the same records that I grew up listening to. Now, on this album, what he does is he delves into the world of progressive rock. Now, this has happened before with jazz musicians, but it's interesting what Brad has done here. So, on this album, I'm just going to go through the track list very quickly. It starts off with a track called Maybe As His Skies Are Wide, right? Now, this is the sound of what sounds like a young boy soprano singing over and over again the refrain from sort of the middle section of Tom Sawyer by Rush. And any Prog fans would have recognised that lyric, which he then embellishes in the same way that Miles Davis did with Nefertiti. So the theme is just played over and over again, and rather than there being set solos within that, the theme just circles and the rest of the music weaves around it, reacting to it. It's really, really interesting. Now, when I put this on, I was like, oh my God, this is Rush. And Rush, for me, was a gateway band, okay? He then goes on to do a track called Herr und Neckt. This is a full-on progressive rock track. Full-on. This is doing what actual progressive rock artists now seem to fail to do, right? And this is I'm going to get into this area at the end of the video, right? After I've sort of reviewed this album. But this is fascinating that jazz musicians, how other jazz musicians have done this, you know. There's that Tigran Hamasayam, or whatever his name is. He's sort of got sort of Bill Evans style jazz piano trio, but he's mining sort of math rock, you know, progressive metal. Very interesting, right? But I think what's going on here is something completely different. We then have Glam Perfume, which is a sort of almost like classical extemporization, almost like Bach, but it moves more and more towards abstraction, and it questions the idea of romanticism. I'm going to get into all this. Then we get 3 tracks which are all based upon Cogs in Cogs by Gentle Giant, which is off the Power and Glory album. An incredible composition, incredible melody that Brad MEHLDAU just opens out. So I'm listening, oh my God, this has got progressive rock on it. Then track 7, he does a version of Tom Sawyer, and it starts off pretty straight, right? And then it goes off and he takes it down an avenue of improvisation, really interesting. Then there's a track called Vu Correndo Te Encontra or / Race Car, which I think is a version of a song, and I don't know the song that well, by Periphery. So like a prog metal math rock band, which he changes quite a lot. Then we get 3 reworkings of Jacob's Ladder by Rush, and that's where the name of the album comes from. Incredible. And then the last track is called Heaven, and it's actually a reworking of Starship Trooper, the said track that I mentioned opened the world up to me. Right, so this is interesting. Here we have a jazz musician that's gone to progressive rock and he's mining progressive rock. Well, other people have done it. In fact, there's been much been said about his version of Tom Sawyer on this track. But of course, a few years back, the band The Bad Plus made an album called Prog, and they did a brilliant cover of Tom Sawyer. But what I feel The Bad Plus were doing on that album, where they were mining the world of prog, is different to what Brad Meldau's doing on this album. This has got something else about it. So what the Bad Plus were doing with Tom Sawyer was that they took the track. It's almost like, we're a jazz group, let's take the track, let's take the chart and do what a jazz group does. Let's play through it and improvise on it, as though it's a sort of song. It's like the statement that these songs are equal to our generation as, say, the jazz standards that came out of sort of the popular songs of the 30s, 40s and 50s were to that. So let's treat it like that. It's a very interesting approach, but I don't think that's what Brad Meldau's doing on this album. It's something else. Now, I want to read the statement that comes inside this album that Brad has made, because there's a bit of text. And when there's a bit of text from the artist, there's an intention there. If you think about A Love Supreme by John Coltrane, that differs from all his other albums because John Coltrane makes a statement about the album's intent on the back. Brad Meldau does the same thing here. I'm going to read it out. This is what it says. It's not what you expect. So Brad says, "We are born close to God, and as we mature, we invariably move further and further away from Him on account of our ego. This is my understanding of the matter. The ego is not bad in itself, but each one of us has to contend with it. We create our destiny within it. It is the locus of all our experience, pain and pleasure, trauma and healing, grief and ecstasy. It is a door that may shut us into a prison as we walk backwards away from God and everyone, retreating in pride and fear, or it may open up as we walk forward, taking hands of others towards Him. Jacob's Ladder begins at that place closer to God with the voice of a child, and then moves into the world of action. God is always there, but in our discovery and conquest and all the joys and sorrows it brings, we may lose sight of Him. Actually, we have been trying to find Him again the whole time, or some other vision of the Absolute, one that is now obscured. God remains locked in a dream. We know He's there, yet are unable through our own volition to enter back into it. He, as in God, sets a ladder before us though, like Jacob's dream, and we climb towards Him to find reconciliation with ourselves, to stitch up all those worldly wounds and finally heal. The record ends with my vision of heaven, once again as a child, His child in eternal grace, in ecstasy. Right, so it's quite apparent that this isn't just like Brad Meldau going, I used to like prog and I'm going to do something quite clever. I'm going to cover some prog tracks in a weird way. He has an intent. When I put the album on originally, not knowing what the subject matter of the album was about, it seemed to me to be almost telling the story of someone's life. And starting in childhood and going up to the point of death. That is quite apparent. That is almost like the aforementioned ladder. You can see life as a climb, that you are moving forward. And so in this respect, it has the same intent of a jazz album like A Love Supreme, or even more so, Ascension by John Coltrane, which is dealing with precisely the same subject matter. Okay, so let's go back to Rush. Why Rush? Well, I can only talk from my personal experience of Rush. The first album I ever bought by Rush was Moving Pictures. The first track that I was aware of ever listening to by Rush was Tom Sawyer. And I can remember putting that record on. I was into rock. Now, Rush rock. And I can remember it opening up with something that didn't sound like rock. It was more electronic, that big bang, that big Taurus pedal, that bass pedal, that big note, you know. And Geddy Lee says, modern day warrior, mean pride. Today's Tom Sawyer, mean pride. And then you get these riffs, ba-down. And these riffs are like sort of, they're heavy, but they're proggy. They're like, it's like a fanfare. It's like opening up, you know. And then we hit that 7/8, and all that stuff comes in. But then it drops down, right? And they do something the rock band, you know, don't do. And it's the bits where it goes, the world is love and light deep. See, I'm not going to put the tracks on like a proper YouTube. I'm just going to sing them. Maybe as his skies are wide. And then we're back to the beginning. And that moment on that record for me was like opening the door to the sublime. Right? In the midst of all this. Now this is about Tom Sawyer. And as a kid you don't understand what these lyrics are about. You know, Tom Sawyer's this person out in nature, and he goes out with Huckleberry Finn. There's all that. And those lyrics are referring to Tom Sawyer, but taken out of context and sung by a child, as Brad MEHLDAU's done here, suddenly we have that line, the world is love and light deep. Maybe as his, and we notice how he's used his skies are wide. It's about being born into this experience, the sublime. You know, it is about experience the beauty of the world and being in awe of that beauty, right? And Brad MEHLDAU chooses to focus on that. Now, I believe because, and this is where he differs from the jazz generation before, he's open to his own personal experience, which of course is what jazz should be. When I heard that bit, the harmony and the sort of ambience of that transported me to somewhere else, and I wanted more. It was rooted in the harmony. I think Brad MEHLDAU, he sees harmony as a door to the sublime. Harmony which actually chords, different types of chords, different voices of chords, can express emotional states which are beyond words. And I think that's what he heard at that point. And that's what I heard at that point. So, let's back up. There's a couple of interesting things here now. Is that we have the use of Rush, not in a knowing, let's play a Rush song. He is using Rush to make a point based upon his own personal experience. And the point is about God. Or we could substitute that in my world to the sublime, which of course is the same thing. Right, and as I've said on this channel, the sublime is the unification of chaos and order. Right, that's what I believe it is. Beauty is the appreciation of that balance. That's what I think. That's what that Rush track, unknowingly 40 years ago when I first heard it, I didn't know it would take me on a journey to that sort of realisation. That's my personal realisation. I chime with that when I put this album on. That's what I feel now. If Brad MEHLDAU is watching this, he might go, no, you're totally wrong, Andy. But that's my interpretation of this. So he's using Rush in a very specific way and quite a profound way. He is pointing to them as a sort of messenger, a conduit towards God. And they are going to appear 3 times on this. They are going to appear at the beginning, representing childhood, representing birth, representing first experience. Then we are going to have Tom Sawyer. And of course, Tom Sawyer is about youth and exuberance, right? But it has these other things. And we are going to hear this refrain repeated later on in context. But here it's out of context. And then near the end of the album, we're going to have another Rush song, Jacob's Ladder, which is precisely about the journey to finding God, the ascension towards heaven, right? And then heaven on here is going to be represented by Starship Trooper. Another song for me which represents exactly the same thing. So we talk about subjectivity, but it's spooky. It's spooky, the specific tracks he's drawing on. Now, as we go through this, I just want to point out the next track, which is called Herr und Knecht, Master and Slave, right? This is one of the greatest progressive rock tracks that I have heard in recent times. Okay? In progressive rock, much as we have chaos and order, much as we have a dichotomy, we have the same emergent dichotomy now in progressive rock. We have a thing called progressive rock. It's the idea of taking rock music and pushing it further out, of experimentation, of taking that genre and opening up. It's that moment in Rush that makes them a prog rock band when it drops out and suddenly expands and he goes, the world is love. You know, AC/DC don't do that, do they? So that is that idea of progression and moving forward. But then we have the genre of prog, and that is certain stylistic things that the fans now want to hear. So you could point at like a Kendrick Lamar album, To Pimp a Butterfly, which I've used a million times. Everything that he's doing on that is the techniques and approaches of progressive rock. To Pimp a Butterfly is a progressive rock album, but it's not a prog album. If a progressive rock fan points it on, they'll go, where's the Mellotrons? Where's the 7/8? You know, where's the 20-minute track? You know, where's the dystopian subject matter? You know, it's like these are the things that, you know, make it prog. Now, I have learned talking on this channel that to denigrate that is silly. You know, prog is a genre. You have to push those things to do it. But also, it would be nice for there to be some actual experimentation and pushing at the boundaries. Now, if you think how hard that is to do nowadays, really difficult. If you start to push it, the prog fans will go, you're progressing, it's not prog. So, this is precisely what Brad Meldau pulls off on this. And this refers to like, Yes, Genesis, ELP, it refers to like Dream Theater, it refers to Periphery and like Meshuggah. He takes on the whole history of progressive rock and he improvises in it, which is something that progressive rock bands don't do anymore, but they used to do. This soloing. He on this track refers to the form, but he also goes beyond the form. He does it. It's sublime. It's one of the great progressive rock tracks. Nobody who likes progressive rock will be able to deny that this track isn't a full-on prog track. But a lot of modern progressive rock fans will go, brought here by their interest in Rush and Gentle Giants, and yes, you know, the fact that it's there, they will listen to go and go, oh, well, this is a bit too much for me. You know, I might have to go and put the big train or Marillion album on now just to get back in a nice comfortable chair of prog. This is not that. He balances it incredibly, right? Now, I had a friend called Alex Thomas, who is the drummer at the moment with John Cale, incredible drummer, and he made a metal album, and it made me laugh because on this metal album he screamed these German words. And because he's not German, he went and grabbed German phrase book and he just screamed very aggressively things like, can you please tell me the way to the station? You know, and I thought that was very funny, very postmodern, very funny. The album is called Earl Shilton. I don't know if you can still listen to it. It's an incredible album, right? The same things on here. We have this guy, you know, shouting out German. And it's on here. Das ande, das tun. Was es tut. I won't carry on because it's probably the most. Now this is a translation from the great idiotic philosopher Hegel. You know, the bonkers philosopher on which all postmodernism, phenomenology, existentialism, Marxism is all based in Hegel. And Hegel represents the split philosophically from the sort of rationalists, So after Descartes, you have the rationalists, the English philosophy, you know, the Hume, and then the John Stuart. We've got that line, and then we have what goes towards continental philosophy. And Hegel brings God back into philosophy. For me, he's a terrible philosopher, and the faults in Marxism and the faults in postmodernism has its roots in Hegel. So I was really like, but Hegel is also like it's the philosophy of the teenager as well. And here it is embedded in a prog metal track. But I know that Brad MEHLDAU is using Hegel to look at this, how you philosophically deal with God. Each one sees the other do the same as it does. This is the Hegel translation. Each one does the same thing that it demands of the other. Therefore, it does what it does only to the extent that the other does the same. Action from only one side would be useless. What arises must come forth from both. To the extent that its action is actually the other one's action, each strives for the other one's death. They reaffirm themselves and thus each other. Through a life and death combat, they must go into battle. Both moments are essential since they are initially unequal and set against each other, and their reflection into the oneness has not yet come to be. They are as yet two opposing forms of consciousness, one independent, existing for itself, the other dependent, existing for another. The one is the master, the other is the slave. From Hegel, phenomenology of spirit. Right. Now, some of you might be going, that's gobbledygook. Yeah, well, it's gobbledygook because it's bloody Hegel. Right? That's what it's like. I love this album, and I think it's an incredible artistic achievement. But this, for me, is the difficulty I have with this album. I've got to it quicker than I thought. Is it's drenched in postmodernism, and postmodernism, which sort of has to deconstruct the narrative, which I feel Brad MEHLDAU, artistically of his age, feels compelled to do. And this happens on the next track, which is called Glam Perfume, which is the romantic track. It's the sentimental track, very beautiful. But halfway through this track, we suddenly have somebody laughing. You know, it's the knowing nod of the postmodernist. But also the postmodernists, unknowingly, in their claim that there is no absolute truth, make an absolute truth claim. And they let God in by the back door. Now, this is an interesting area to explore, and I feel that Brad MEHLDAU is exploring it on this. He's exploring this idea. And the postmodernism works for me artistically, even though I don't agree with it. But it's definitely a postmodern jazz album. Now, postmodernism is beginning to crack for the very reasons that I say. You know, that era is drawing to a close, you know. The fundamental problem, which I've just explained here, and there's a lot more problems with that philosophy, is being put under strain. And for me, it lets God in by the back door, or even worse, it lets the devil in by the back door. You know, this album is about God. That's what it is about. Okay? So, we also could see this idea of moving towards adulthood. Now, he then goes and does Cogs in Cogs. Now, this is off a Gentle Giant album called Power and the Glory, and this refers to the machinations of power, you know, of the Machiavellian study of kingship, of politics. He enters into the political world, and this is most embodied in the tracks Cogs within Cogs. What's it called? Cogs in Cogs, right? And this is a very convoluted composition, which actually, it sounds like Cogs. We're embroiled within the machinations of adult life, of politics, of stances, of positions, you know. And he explores that. So we see now, he is very specifically picking songs from his past, songs that you do not associate with jazz, which is interesting, but he's not just picking them because he likes them. He's telling a story. He's telling a story of the journey from childhood, of being close to God, close to experience, you know, of being at one with the world, into the sort of world of ego, of power, of Putins and Trumps. That's where we're at now. Then right in the middle, we now get Tom Sawyer. And there's this fantastic thing, as I said, of now hearing the voice at the beginning disembodied is now placed in context. No. Tom Sawyer can almost be seen as that sort of pioneering spirit where you escape the grid, you escape the machinations of the world, you step out into nature, which is something Tom Sawyer does with Huckleberry Finn, you know. So there is this there. We then get the periphery track race car, which I've got to be honest, I can't quite see how this fits in. I'm sure it does, because I know Brad MEHLDAU has really thought this album out. And then we go into Jacob's Ladder. Now, Jacob's Ladder, harmonically, which is off the album Permanent Waves, is the sort of prog epic. This is when Rush were moving towards a sort of tighter, more popular music sound, but they were still delivering prog epics. And Jacob's Ladder is like one of their prog epics. I think they've got, what's the other one on there? Word in the tidal array. Why can't I not remember that one? You know, the one about the tide pools. Is it called Tide Pools? I know there's a bit called Tide Pools on it. Anyway, I can't remember it. I do know it. Senior moment. Anyway, I'll move on. So Jacob's Ladder harmonically expresses the idea of ascension. He's using it in the context. He understands what it means. An incredible track and a beautiful track. And then we end up with Starship Trooper. Starship Trooper, I've always said, is I Love Awaken by Yes, which deals with exactly the same thing as what Starship Trooper. Again, it's about its ascension, but it arrives in that place. So, a couple of interesting things about this album. It's a full-on prog album. Not just because they're playing tracks by prog bands, but he's also treated in the prog way. The virtuosity is off the scale. There's multiple composition. He differs from Keith Jarrett in that he's very interested in electronic keyboards and samplers, and that is utilised on here. So we get all that which you associate with progressive rock bands. There's vocals on it. A lot of the time, if you took any jazz fusion group and you banged vocals on it, it would sound like progressive rock. So there's vocals throughout this album. It's not vocals that you would expect on a jazz album where people are singing sort of jazz standards. The vocals are utilised like a rock band would utilise vocals. But the overriding thing for me, the thing that blows me away about this album, it's prog because of the conceptual continuity, for the idea, for the intent. It does the same thing that Dark Side of the Moon does. It does the same thing that Close to the Edge does, or Thick as a Brick does. But it also does the same thing which Kind of Blue does. It does the same thing with A Love Supreme does, or Ascension does. All right? It does the same thing. This is an album with a concept, and it runs through. And for me, this is something that existed in jazz, which has been lost. Now, most jazz is a bunch of clever players going into a studio with very little rehearsal because they haven't got the budgets. They've written some heads, they play the heads, they solo, and then they play the heads. And that is how jazz works. That's what Charlie Parker was doing. But there's a history there. And I think that could well be the thing that I miss, is the artistic intent. Where is the art in modern jazz? Because without the art, it just becomes the exposition and demonstration of jazz chops. Oh, isn't he clever? He can do that. Brad MEHLDAU here is making an artistic statement, a specific artistic statement, and it's an incredible thing. And I think this, for me, is a great jazz album. It does contradict what I say on that video, right? It does contradict, because that again is a dichotomy. But it also points out that it is the case, right? This proves it's what I'm saying, because it is the exception to the rule. And we can say, well, he's doing this, he's doing this. And when you put it on, for a jazz listener, I think they might go, well, it doesn't sound like a jazz album to me. This bit sounds like a rock, this bit sounds like electronica, this bit sounds like classical music. And if a progressive rock fan was to listen to it, they'd go, yeah, but where's the prog, as I've said? So I feel like this is one of the great modern prog albums, and one of the great modern jazz albums. I think it's a masterpiece, and that's why I'm talking about it on this channel. And it makes me think. Right, now, The playing is incredible. Michael Giuliani, or whatever his name is on the drums. How do you say it? Mike Giuliani. Incredible jazz drummer. Virtuosity off the chops. The soloing is monumental. The playing is incredible. The production's interesting. It was recorded in COVID, this album, so it was multi-tracked. People aren't in the same room playing. Some of this employs studio techniques that you do not associate with a jazz album. Or where modern jazz players, because a lot of albums are recorded separately with file transfer, but they are trying to create the illusion that they are in the same room. Brad MEHLDAU does not do that. He accepts the limits of the technology that he's working in because of COVID, and he makes a recording, an artistic statement that utilises that. What's the word? When you can't limit, acknowledges its limits and uses them artistically, which is something else that jazz musicians used to do. It's an excellent album. It really is an excellent album. I think the idea that this is true progressive rock and it is also prog in that it points to the generic qualities that make something prog, and the way he has unified that for me is very powerful, and the unification for that to explore the nature of God. It's incredible. It's an incredible album. I think I have got to the end of this video. I wanted to go off on a tangent with this and explore it, but I think I've done that. For me, I'm quite surprised I've been quite concise. I feel like, because when I do my videos, I never know when I've got to the end of them, but I feel I've actually got to the end. I think if I go on any further, it will spoil the nature of this video. This video was inspired by this album. It is an offshoot of the experience of listening to this album. It is my take on it, and I hope I can act, at least in my tiny way, as a part of the message of this album. I'm not trying to jump on to the coattails of its success or trying to say that what I'm doing is as great as Brad MEHLDAU. I'm not doing that at all. What I'm saying is that this is how art works. Art should promote this type of discussion, this type of thought. It should be able to raise these ideas. And I think as we come out of this postmodernist period, which has there is a feeling that there is a need for God. There is a feeling that there is a need, and these characters like Jordan Peterson that have appeared and have become so divisive in our culture is basically making that statement. Okay, the far right have stood up and shown themselves to be champion, liberty. They're the libertarians on the one case, but on the other case there is a lot of sort of Christianity and religious structure that is being put forth within that, and then on the left you have another fight against that of people who want to be able to justify their morals from their own personal subjective opinion, and they don't believe there's a God, and that's a sign of left liberalism at the moment. This is the churning machinations that are actually taking our culture and bending it and twisting it, hopefully, into a new culture that will have its positive attributes. The fear is that it doesn't, and we are living at the moment through a time which is tumultuous. And Brad MEHLDAU, I feel, is dealing with that. He is exploring that from the roots of COVID, because COVID was where the right started acting like communists, and when the left started acting like authoritarian, and the whole thing suddenly cracked, didn't it? It cracked. And we're desperately searching for meaning, which is what this album is about. I've come to the end. I'm not going to go on anymore. It'll get too deep. I'll get confused and I'll get lost. So, I felt like there was a lot I wanted to say about this album. I don't know whether I've said it all. But there it is, Jacob's Ladder, by Brad MEHLDAU, an absolute masterpiece of an album, whether you're a progressive rock fan or you are a jazz fan. Those of you who know the album can tell me what you think about it in the comments. Those of you who I have piqued your interest, go and have a listen. Oh, that was the one thing I wanted to say, right? I listened to this album. I knew there was something I wanted to say. There's another bit I wanted to get in this video, and it's a bit off. Now I'm going to do it now. I've remembered it, you see. Right, let's say there's another bit coming up now. Right, this is like special features. Right, so when Brad MEHLDAU was brought up, what about Brad MEHLDAU? He's not like you said. He's doing interesting things. He's an amazing musician. You can't knock him and say he sounds like everybody else. So I went and checked this album out. Like, oh my God, he's doing Rush songs. Yeah, my interest was piqued. I went on Spotify and listened to it. I had a good listen to it, put the headphones on and had a listen to it, right? And I thought, it's really good. But I liked it much to buy it. I bought the album and I didn't listen to it because we've got Spotify now, all right? After the Rick Beato video, I pulled my album off the shelf and I stuck the CD in my car, and for the last week I've been driving around listening to it, going round and round it, like the old days, like I used to listen to records. My perception is entirely different, right? The depth that I got out of it by listening to the actual album, be able to hold the album in my hand, look at the cover, open it up, see the artwork inside, pull out the little booklet, see who's playing on it, have an explore, go deep into the thing, be able to see the structure of it in front of me, you know, see the notes, see who wrote the tracks, you know, being able to step back and see the track list in front of me and be able to take it in. The depth. And it's made me think that perhaps the reason why we really think that all music sounds the same is because the mechanism that communicates art to us is not that great. Now, there's a guy called Ted Gioia or something like that. Or Goya, I don't know how you spell it. He's been interviewed by Rick Beato. He is probably one of the best interpreters and writers on music and modern culture. He is the Don as far as I'm concerned. And he brought out a Substack article, and I read it last night. And he puts up this picture, and it's like, he goes, this is how we used to see art. And it was a signpost pointing that way that said art, and then another one pointing the other way, like that, saying entertainment. You've got art and you've got entertainment. That is, you know, that's art, that's entertainment. There's a grey area in the middle, but that's how we used to see art and entertainment. He said, if you're an artist, it looks more like this. And it was a fish with the word art, a little fish with the word art, and it was being eaten by a bigger fish called entertainment, right? But he then carries on and he said there's a bigger fish trying to eat entertainment, and that bigger fish has got written on it, distraction. But there's an even bigger fish, right? An even bigger fish that is eating the distraction, and that's got the words addiction on. Now, you need to go and read the article, right? I don't want to go deep into this. It's a whole video. I may have to do a video because this blew me away, because it's like what we have is right at the end of it, art is being edged out as the addictive qualities of the means of communication that we now have, i.e. not the record, not the radio, not the concert hall, right? The main method of transmission of information and art or entertainment, whatever you want to call it, is rooted in distraction, and distraction is rooted in addiction. And after spending a whole life, and I'm 50, 55, 56 years old, 56 in April, spending a whole life, working in this, being obsessed by it, listening to all the albums I've got behind me, as you know, I'm finding it hard to keep my attention on music and art. And I think this is a really important thing. It's a really important thing that has been made, and it was something going back to this album. This album you're not going to understand by just clicking on it and listening. Oh, he's done a cover of Tom Sawyer and listen. You won't get it. You have to sit and listen to the album. Now, his big hero, well, one of them is, of course, Pat Metheny, who's played with. Now, a few years back, Pat Metheny did an album called The Way Up, and The Way Up is one track, which is through composed music for an hour and 10 minutes. The only way you could take the album is to sit down and listen to it all the way through. And it was Pat Metheny's challenge. You know, how many years ago did that album come out? It was 15, 20 years ago, wasn't it? It was Pat Metheny's challenge against this very thing, which has now got 100 times worse. And I think this is so important in the original thing that brought me here, which is this asking why modern jazz sounds the same. It has to sound the same. It has to push the buttons. The jazz musician has to come on and display his virtuosity for, you know, 50 seconds on a TikTok video that people go, ooh, it's so clever and you're so cool. You know, that is what it's been reduced to. Brad MEHLDAU does not do that. The showboating is not there, you know, and so the true jazz artist, the true artist, is under threat at the moment. Anyway, I've definitely said it all now. I've got to where I wanted. I'm done. If you like this video, like it. So that means you press the like button now. Do it right now to help me out. It won't hurt you. Go on. You know, do something. You know, you sat and watched it, you got to the end, just go click on the like, or if you're on your phone, just point and click it, right? And if you want to see some more and you're not subscribed, then press the subscription button, right? And then you'll be able to see some more videos and see what I do. If you want to support me, I have a Patreon, which has got so much content on there, all sorts of different stuff, not just videos like this, but all sorts of different things. And you can get involved in the Patreon meet, which we all get together on Zoom, and you can go and watch those conversations, and they are great fun. And if you don't want to support me in that way, but you do want to give me a little tip, like some, you know, digital online busker, you can go to my YouTube PayPal tip jar. This is now the symbol of that I do every time I mention it. I always do this. It's become abstracted now. So that there, down there, the PayPal tip jar. So click in there and I will appreciate your donations very much. And I think hopefully in the next month or so, you may see a change on the channel as he does his eyebrows to denote intrigue. You may see a change here. We're working on it, which has been able to be done because of your donations. So I thank you all very much for those of you who've done that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Go and check the album out and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.